Hello, and welcome to CI Security's presentation of 8 steps you can take to control risk in the newly critical work-from-home environment. My name is Mike Simon. I'm the CTO of CI Security. I've been working in information security for the last 30 years, variously teaching, consulting, and building infrastructure for people that support exactly the kind of thing I'm about to talk about today. While we've seen the pandemic coming for a bit now, the move to largely work from home environments is a little surprising, I think, for a lot of IT shops. Even if it's not surprising, we really didn't have enough time to prepare properly to have essentially the entire workforce at home being productive. So, big surprise, everyone is working from home. Many of you have been in environments where work from home is possible, where it is an occasional thing that is allowed or encouraged. Rarely, except in some special cases, is the entire workforce working from home. One of the issues that you're going to run into while you're deploying this for your entire company is that you're not in control of those work environments. The environment itself has characteristics that are hard to control, that are not, from a cybersecurity perspective, maybe as safe as what you might expect if somebody were working at their desktop inside of the workplace. So we'll talk about what some of those differences mean in terms of cybersecurity and how to address them. The environment itself has, let's say, more than just your standard coworkers with you. There are children, potentially spouses, potentially wonderful elements of your home, but not qualified, not allowed, in most cases, to see your work laptop, your work itself on the laptop. And you're using, very likely at home, the same network as the rest of those folks who are also at home with you. We threw this photo in actually partly because when I looked at it, I had a very different interpretation of it than our head of marketing, who is a parent. Head of marketing said, oh, well, that's clearly the mother's phone. Child has gained access to a phone that's probably a work phone that they shouldn't have access to. Because from his perspective, that child is too young to own a phone. When I looked at this photo, from an information security perspective, I saw something somewhat different, which was a selfie being taken in a workplace where potentially that screen or work paper, actual work product, would be captured in that selfie in an uncontrolled environment such as the child's phone. Both of those interpretations are interesting and useful. Both kind of point out this differential that's happening. Also, while we're working from home, many of us get a little bit tired of being essentially trapped, even in our wonderful home. There's a need to get out and about. That out and about, if they're also working, if they're taking that work environment with them, means even less control. Really, in this beautiful setting, somebody outside on a park bench, getting some work done, maybe. Unfortunately, not shielding that screen from people who may be walking behind her. And we'll talk a little bit about that environment. Starting in the environment, you don't have direct control necessarily of the digital environment itself. The settings on their edge, their router, firewall, whatever it is that is protecting that home user from people coming into their network from the internet, you probably want to ask a few questions about that for each of those home workers. Maybe start with a survey. Say, what kind of hardware do you have on your edge? Do you know how it's configured? Are you in control of it, or is your ISP or carrier in control of it? And if possible, even getting a little bit more detailed about how it might be configured. If they're using Wi-Fi at home, clearly you want them to be using an encrypted Wi-Fi, WPA2 or WPA3 most likely. Have they updated it? Are they keeping it current? Vulnerabilities in these kinds of systems are rampant, and home users typically are not as on top of patching as you might be in your work environment. The obvious things, again, in a work environment, like have you changed the default password for that device? If you see a Wi-Fi, a clearly home Wi-Fi anywhere in the world, guessing that they're using the original password that came with it is often a useful guess. And the fourth item on here, what does it look like in quotes with the word look? The picture we see here is somebody intently staring at, I'm sure, an important document from work, and with their back to a window. Depending on what kind of information you work with in your work environment, you may or may not have to think about somebody walking by being able to see what's on his screen. In general, though, these sight lines, the ability to, for example, be in a separate office, in a bedroom that is dedicated as office space, the ability to close that door, or maybe shut the blinds if a screen would be exposed to a window. Those are important, potentially, depending on what kind of information you work with. CI Security works with customer data. We actually do physically control these things in a work from home environment because the kind of information that may be on screen is sensitive. And then you want to actually think, and again, survey may be the right choice here, think a little bit about what else might be on that network. Are there connected light bulbs on the network? Are there security doorbell cameras on that same network? Do you trust the security from a corporate perspective? Do you trust the security of those third-party systems? Most of those third-party systems reach out directly to a cloud environment through that home user's edge and provide, to some degree, that cloud environment to manipulate that device. So, turning on and off a light, that's not usually happening directly because you're on the same network. It's happening because you're connected to the cloud environment that light bulb is also connected to. These are just things to think about regarding that digital environment and the physical environment that they're actually sitting in while they're at home, which is very different, of course, from work. The next item to think about is to control that computer itself, the one that they're using. The best scenario is that they're using a work laptop that they have taken home. In that case, you probably have some sort of mobile device management going on. If you don't, you should consider that. You have controls on it like endpoint management. You've got antivirus and all of the sorts of things that you would have in your work environment running while that machine is sitting on their desk at home. If you don't have enough laptops to make that happen in this environment we're working with now, where we're sending everybody home to work to try to keep people safe from the virus, you may consider sending a desktop home. It's clumsy and a pain in the neck to actually get transported back and forth, but it is a computer that has those controls in place. If you do that, remember that desktop is not intended to be a mobile environment. You may have to reconfigure it to work on their home environment. So also policy-wise, things like screen locks. When you walk away from a computer, the work environment at CI Security is one where we take the security of our customer data very, very seriously, and encourage people, even in the safest possible environment, in our SOC, in our office space. When you stand up and walk away from your computer, you physically lock it yourself. If your Windows Control Delete Space and you've locked that screen, to the degree where we actually, if you don't lock your screen, we'll do interesting things to your background and just to remind you. That is harder to understand and enforce, certainly on a computer that you don't control, and even a computer in a separate environment like a home environment becomes far more critical. You can imagine a curious child walking up to an unlocked computer and potentially using that computer, as children now are very familiar with doing, in ways that you would not expect, or ways that the company wouldn't hope would happen. So the care that you have to take in terms of how you physically control that computer and how you keep it safe when you walk away from it, again, something to work through with policy, something to work through with employees. And last, on the remote desktop physicality, you definitely should be using some form of full disk encryption on that system. If the home is broken into, if that mobile device is taken, and these are generally taken because they're valuable, not because they have valuable information on them or information that people are trying to get their hands on, although that does happen. They're taken because they're a $1,000 device or a $2,000 device. Because of that, they become targets in their own right if they are stolen. The company would prefer, your company generally, would prefer that the loss be a hopefully minor financial loss in terms of just the loss of the hardware, and not the hit that you might take if you have to disclose to customers or to anybody else whose information is on that system that it may have been exposed. People working from home also they're in a slightly different environment just generally. Their headspace may be slightly different from when they're sitting at their desk. They're looking at the knickknacks in their home. They have the dog walking by. They have their family around them. They're not thinking necessarily always about work. And because of that, you really need to step up your game in terms of testing. If their head's not always in that work mode, they may not be thinking about incoming phishing email, incoming calls, even, in the same way that they would if they were at their desk. So I would suggest additional phishing, additional training, phishing testing, I should say, and just walking through some awareness training about the fact that criminals are already taking advantage of these new environments, of the fact that there's a lot of interesting clickbait available.
Just a moment.
That there is my phone listening to me. There's just a lot of folks out there trying to take advantage of this situation to their own benefit. As disgusting as that is, we do need to help our employees, help the people that we work with, our communities, protect themselves from that. You need to also consider, in the course of everyone's daily work, you need to consider the fact that they must handle, in at times, sensitive documents, either internally sensitive to the organization or sensitive information of others. There's a lot of healthcare workers doing telemedicine working at home right now. There's a lot of folks who have access to information that is inherently private. But they're not handling it in that safe and secure work environment that they had a few weeks ago. They're handling it in their homes. Not every company will have the same kinds of policies around this, but consider what it means. Consider what having that kind of sensitive data and working with it in individual homes means regarding your policy, regarding where you store that kind of information, how you use cloud services. Cloud services actually can be super helpful in terms of having a place where these documents can reside in a very secure environment in most cases, without actually being stored ever on the end laptop. While you're doing that, you probably need to remind folks about those policies. In my experience, when people violate this kind of policy and copy a file to their desktop in violation of company policy, it's not because they want to do something bad or they're trying to in any way damage the company. It's because they're very focused on getting the work done. Your policies need to accommodate getting the work done, and if it's not possible, you need to reconsider. You need to think about how you can make that happen securely. Something to keep in mind is that while everybody is out and about in environments that weren't intended for their general daily work, your IT department is busy. Are they watching alerts? Are they watching what's happening on the corporate network, which is maybe less occupied than it used to be, maybe a little more quiet, and maybe a little more of a target because of that? There are some risks inherent that we've been talking about for those end users. There are some inherent security risks to your corporate environment, even though there aren't people sitting there clicking all day long. What about the security team? How are they working from home? Are they working from home? Do they have visibility into all of the things that they should for this new distributed environment? You can outsource to lower some of that burden. There are companies like my own company. There are companies like CI Security who specialize in taking on some of that monitoring burden. That's what we've done since the inception of this company. And you might want to ask them how they're handling. If you do already have a managed detection and response provider, ask them how they're handling COVID-19. We actually put a business continuity plan in place immediately as we started the company. We test it more than annually. As we saw COVID-19 coming at America, we preemptively actually tested our business continuity plan for our analysts again successfully, and we are using that now in a controlled environment that's actually part of our third-party audited environments. Ask them these questions. You need to know the answers. This is something that IT is dealing with right now. You've had to expand your VPN environment. You've had to expand it beyond anything you ever imagined you would to the entire workforce. Because of that, while you may have had a very secure authentication scheme that used two-factor for a handful of people, you now have to extend that to quite a large number of people. You may need to make that fairly flexible. You may need to consider federated identity, maybe using O365 credentials as a federation tool. There's lots of ways of handling these items. And yes, split tunnels is a little controversial. There's guidance out there right now from Microsoft that says you should be splitting your tunnels. If you read through that guidance, it's entirely not about security. It's about the load that not split tunnels will be putting onto your VPN. That load is significant. My suggestion would be that in order to accommodate your security goals, you beef up your VPN. The issue we're dealing with COVID-19 is not going to go away soon. You are going to be using your corporate resources from home for quite some time into the future, and that in itself should make you think that the VPN infrastructure might want a little bit of attention. Split tunnels are problematic from a security perspective. The briefly it puts those work from home computers on the internet and on your corporate network at the same time. That's not quite the same as being behind the corporate firewall, in that the firewall you're depending on now is that home firewall, not the corporate controls. Some of that traffic is not monitored for that same reason. Take a look, Google NIST Special Publication 800-46. It is their guidance on teleworking. There's some excellent conversations about split tunnel and many other things in there. I'm not putting a link in because you shouldn't click on links from random folks like myself, but please do take a look at that. Almost last, step 8, you should keep records of what you're doing right now. All of the behavior, all of the things that you have done to enable teleworking, to enable work from home, for a lot of reasons. You're probably going to have to execute this again at some point. It's great to learn lessons. It's great to record what worked well. And if you're in a regulatory environment, you may be audited. So just keep an eye on how things are working. Also, if you've sent desktops home, if you have changed things in order to enable work from home, there may be a lot of things you need to undo when everybody goes back to the office. And one last bonus step. This is some of our amazing marketing team here at CI Security pointing out that if you're taking screenshots and sharing them, do not do what's been done here. That Zoom meeting ID, if we weren't carefully protected, if that wasn't old and done and closed, would be something somebody else could use to actually spy on telemeetings. So keep your meetings safe. Make sure that you understand who is on a meeting with you. If you see a phone number dialing in that you don't know, you might want to ask them who they are. My last slide, I just want to say that in my experience and 30 years of consulting, the departments that you companies have dealing with this, they've got this. They understand the problem. They probably, for them, most of what I just talked about is review. We're in this together to try to keep ourselves, to keep our families, and keep the things that each of you do, the things that your companies achieve, safe and operational.